Hi everyone, Mature Simmer here. So back here on the generational farm, I've got everything on the field to collect still. So I have limed the field. I am going to need to fertilize the field at some point, but I can always do that after collecting things up. At this point, I've gone ahead and sold a little bit more silage, as that's kind of what I need to do to get going with what else is happening. So let's cover the facts of what we've got going on. I have 227,000 plus liters of silage still left to be processed in the silo. I'm just starting to pick up this last harvest of grass. Given what I know, I'm going to have about 300,000 liters of grass on this field because this is fully fertilized field at this point. So that's going to put me in excess of 500,000 liters of grass to process. With that reality and the fact that this silo processes about 84 to 85,000 liters of silage a day, given that basically we're going to be into the spring and ready to add more grass into the mix in 4 or 5 months at most, I could only process a little over 400,000 liters in that time. So again, as anyone with basic math skills is going to be able to tell you, that creates a bit of a problem. So the fact is, our bottleneck is throughput. At this point, I'm collecting up these immediate rows instead of going ahead and doing something else because of the next steps I need to do to alleviate that. And that alleviation is going to be this. So yes, at this point, I have got 2 silos here that are going to go ahead and work on silage, because that is how we're going to work through a throughput issue. Now, I've intentionally put these together this way so that the inputs are in the center, the outputs are on the edges, just as a nice symmetry of what I like with that. But over the course of this year, I have gotten to the point, and by the way, we've got a full load, so that's our first full pull off the field. So I'm just going to continue now to do the rest of the pull while I chat with you about my thinking and what I'm doing. So the math at this point is pretty simple, and has just been more compelling as year 2 has played out, and I've actually once again got actual data and actual results to back up what I'm saying instead of hunches and financial models only. But the financial models are then much easier to work with more accurate input. I did not have Field 39 the entire year, so keep that in mind with everything I'm presenting here about year 2. I've gone ahead and added that field after I already had 2 harvests of grass. So Field 39 will simply improve those numbers by a magnitude of 40% over what I had in existence because I didn't have those fields in place at the time. The other issue to keep in mind is I did make the mistake that I learned about back in the video that I clearly titled I Made a Mistake, where I didn't fertilize, and I also haven't limed the field, which decreased my throughput somewhat. I'm now not going to continue to make that mistake going forward, which means anybody kind of trying to catch up after this is going to be, at the disadvantage that, I'm not going to make those mistakes again, and therefore there's a smaller and smaller margin of opportunity for anybody to make up ground that is already having an issue. Keep in mind that as I sit here with $2,583 in my bank balance, that is fully debt-free after buying 3 fields. So I've got 3 fields that I'm going to get 100% of my money back. Any of the buildings we get a good amount back, about 50% at this point. So there is a loss to be made up there, but as you can see shortly as I go through everything else, this is an investment in profit and in just a money-making machine. So the thing, in short, that has been verified is the grass is unbeatable in FS22 in a competition like what we have here, which is simply to make the most amount of money with the rule set we have, and to continue to focus on that, in essence, generational wealth across generational farming. At this point, I am pretty much prepared to even throw out the fact that even if the equipment rule is changed, I believe the advantage of grass is so high that it basically renders it moot and doesn't matter. Yes, you're going to take less of a loss on that equipment, but what is going on now is with what I have, and as I said, this is not a year, like next year's going to be better. Unless, of course, I have some realities of real life that don't allow me to maximize everything and so forth, which can happen. So that's the opportunity folks will have in all of this, and we all have that same issue as we talked about. If someone can work the farm more than I can work the farm, or vice versa, that's going to get a leg up. So I know for certain there's been folks on the server that have not been able to do 5 grass harvests this year. I'm assuming that's the same for anybody else that's doing grass on the other servers. It just means you need to be available every 2 days for, in my case, 3 to 4 hours every couple days. And that may or may not be possible for everybody. It's not going to be possible for me in perpetuity. I think it's unlikely to be possible for anyone in perpetuity. There's going to be times we're going to miss harvests. There's going to be times we're going to miss an entire year on the server, for example, because, we've got jobs. We're going to go on business trips. We're going to be gone for a week where we can't do things. That pretty much washes out a year. In my case, I'm sure there's others that have the same thing, where they're going to get buried in a project and so forth. So we continue to bang out things when we can. So the reality for this year is I'm at the point that I am making $216,000 in sales off of silage this year. If I roll in having the field for the entire year, that basically will increase to $250,000 a year. And then here is the kicker, where we get into the reality of once you take actual data from FS22 and figure out what that looks like. Keep in mind, I'm doing this with basically 10 acres of grass. I have simply 10 acres of field I need to work here. To make an equivalent amount working crops, you would need about 100 acres. So it's literally a 10 times magnification of ability to make money with crops over grass. Even if you can double crop, which is a significant amount of work, you will then be approaching that with perhaps 50 acres if we're being generous. And it is challenging, to say the least, on the crop calendar in FS22 to double crop efficiently and productively in a way that you would really generate that much. I think it might be a little bit less. It might be in the neighborhood of 200 to 225. Now, from a work time standpoint, as I've shared, I'm doing 3 to 4 hours of work a year on these fields. And again, there's actually a little bit more here because I wasn't able to mow and collect like I normally would. Putting these 2 silos in now changes that dynamic, so I should be able to keep that work time down a little bit, because this last harvest wouldn't require 2 passes, just as the harvest before required a partial set of 2 passes. So you're talking about 15 hours of work. You now lump in work time calculations into this. Mowing and picking things up I can do at 10 to 11 miles per hour. You can only harvest at 6. So even if you have a larger expanse, there's a difference in time there. And basically, harvesting a 20 to 30 acre field with a 45-foot header, so a 15-meter header or so, is going to take you about 2 to 3 hours. Now you're moving crop around at that point, you're going and selling it, so, all that gets added in and so forth. You then have the added issue of you're having to plant that field, which is about the same amount. So from a work time standpoint, and again, keep in mind that's a 20 to 30 acre field, but to create the same amount of income that I can do off these 10 acres with that number of hours, you would have to be working 100 acres. So you need to take that and multiply it by 3 to 4 times at the most optimistic standpoint. So now you're talking 8 to 9 hours of harvest, and you're talking about that much in fertilization and planting and so forth. And you're also dealing with weeds on the flip side, where once again, if you're trying to maximize that output to try to be at all competitive with the massive throughput of grass, you have that issue. The challenge also then becomes, from a competitive standpoint, if suddenly we start seeing really large crop folks working, that becomes no different than it does with anything else where, okay, I need to increase my output. I need to go from 10 acres to 20 acres. And again, the multiplication factor of 10 times means they would need to go from 100 to 200. I could run 50 acres of grass if I had the time to do it, compared to 500 acres of crop for them to even remotely be within spitting distance of generating the income level that can be done with grass. And so this is now what I'm seeing, which I've never really worked in detail in FS22 in a financial model, because the grass I was doing in Shellbrook, I was just kind of doing to feed my cows. It was kind of like a cost of doing business to get dairy. There's nothing that is going to beat grass, the way I see it, from just taking it and converting to silage because of the sheer amount of throughput that you're getting. So at the output that I'm getting off of these 3 fields, I'm going to be generating over 1.5 million liters a year off of 10 acres. So once again, you need to kind of run that across, and then that's where you start to see where that, multiplication is of, what I'm saying is truly about 10 times when you really get down to it. So in a perfect situation, it goes down to maybe 7 times. So when you're still talking 70 acres as opposed to 10, it's just a really big hill to climb. So I think there's still also then, this is where I say, even being able to hold equipment, if you can buy harvesters, you can buy massive tractors, you can work that 100 or 200 acres because you're dealing with Seahawks and things like that. I'm still not sure that the cost differential of having to have that equipment versus being able to have marginally larger equipment, but still be able to do it, say, with 25 to 30 acres of grass, which means I don't need something massive. It means the bare reality is that the working capital required to operate a grass farm of similar revenue magnitude is significantly less than any other option. Trying to put in, say, a dairy barn here when we're only on a given map for 7 to 10 years. If you're doing something like I did on Shellbrook with 240 cows, by the time you have the animals, by the time you have the $1 million building, you just can't generate enough milk, for example, to keep up with something that has this kind of throughput as grass does. And because of that, that's why I am now fully committed to grass unless something changes. But I also now have a year of data that was a far from perfect year that shows the crop output. Like, it's not possible to beat this with crops. On the best year, when I was on Hilly Seneca, and I double cropped 110 to 120 acres. So that's basically 200 to 240 acres. That year I made $700,000. in profit. So that was after supplies and everything. But that was with custom sales and brokerage sales that are available in FSN, which with the crops utilized at that time were inflating the crops, in some cases double what I could get for them direct in game. It's possible on some of the generations that customs will be available to us, so that will potentially open that up. But even in that case, you're having to work 250 acres, either singly with one crop or, half that and double crop. And then we're back to the issue of the work time for that, transporting all that crop for sale, storing that crop in a silo, which is then something you need to invest in to sit there and wait for that price to be where you need it to be to get to that level. So the reality is probably you're still talking with that effort. $350,000, $400,000 is probably what's realistically going to be possible. But you're doing it with such a massive amount of extra acreage that you first need to be able to afford, on top of all your other equipment. So I'd say I've clearly made the cold hard mathematical case here of why I just placed the second silo. Now, to some degree, there will be changes when we move. One of the things I looked at is, does it make sense to get rid of the small, jump to a medium? I still think, unless I run a much larger operation because of the throughput of a large silo, it's not necessary. So, knowing that I have 1.6 million liters a year to make sure that I can cover, say, a better set of crop output or throughput, then I've determined is what I'm getting. At the 84 to 85,000 liters a day that a silo will handle, both of these silos together are going to be able to process that quantity in 18 cycles, or not together. A small silo can process that in 18 cycles. So what that means is 9 days. 10 days, just to be safe. A medium silo, on the other hand, that can hold about 550,000 instead of 338,000 liters, and can process 141,000 units a day versus 84 to 85,000, would take 11 to 12 months to do the same amount, which means I have no margin for error in that case. And it would have really cost me about the same. I could have sold that small silo and recovered 30,000, so it would have cost me more because the other silo is 100, and so my net increase in cost would have been 70,000. Instead, I'm able to get 170,000 liters of throughput a day against 140,000, and nearly 680,000 liters of capacity against 550 for $10,000 less in this case. Now, once again, starting up on a new map, that cost would be 120 versus 110. Knowing that I can do this amount, I now have a clear target that off of 10 acres, if I target 10 acres, I need a medium silo. If suddenly other players are cranking along at a good pace, and I figure that 10 acres isn't enough, and I think I can work more, I now know I need multiple iterations of those silos. But I think I'm going to be in a wonderful place with what I'm going to get off of this generation, now that I'm just pressing forward here, to have the capital to go ahead and buy those silos and that land if I need to do so. Let's also keep in mind, for frame of reference here, this is my 6th load at this point. So we are now coming up on 100,000 liters of grass that have deposited in the silos at this point. I might be able to get one more trailer into this original silo, perhaps a little bit more than that. We'll see what happens the next time. But the key is I absolutely have enough capacity now with multiple those two silos operating together. Because what I was facing and what caused me to do this, but what I was pressing urgently with, was to stay out of debt. I wanted to get that 60,000 free and clear. Is I know I'm going to get about 300 to 320,000 liters off these 3 fields at this point in this harvest, and one of those silos can handle that as far as the storage capacity. Or if I hadn't added the silo, I could get 110,000 off this field. So basically this cart that I'm pulling in now would have been it, and then I would have had to have stopped and waited until the next couple days or later today if I wanted to get on later and move a little bit more in as more things processed. So very quickly I was able to tell I've got a key bottleneck, because then I'm also, again, every 2 cycles I'm generating more than the 160,000 or so that the single silo can process. But at this point, I'm now going to be able to process 320,000 in those same 2 days, which is going to fully process everything from each harvest in the time I actually have, versus what I had been doing last year, which was kind of chasing my tail. And what I started to realize in the modeling was I was never going to catch my tail. I was going to continue to get further and further behind, to the point where I would almost have to take a year off or something. I mean, it wouldn't be that drastic, but I'd have to take time off to just allow things to catch up. So there's not a lot of FMs that I've spoken to or that I've seen post things that are sharing a lot about specifically what their strategies or their thinking are. So I can only infer what I think I'm seeing by what they're doing. So for example, there's an FM on our server here who has placed a hayloft on their farm in the last couple days. The only logical reason for that I can see at this point is to store silage to ensure that they can sell it at the top end of the price, because as I saw in my own silo, to keep up with things I had to keep selling. I still think that is a strategy that is short-sighted in the cost models that we have here, and here is why. At a minimum, a hayloft costs 50,000. So it's nearly as much as this additional silo that I added, but this additional silo not only is giving me capacity, it's giving me production throughput, as opposed to simply storage. And so banking on the fact that I could sell and store all my silage till I could get 190, which is the top end of the sales, and thinking that's going to give me a marginal improvement over someone who's selling at 150 or 170. And again, 170 is the average. So I'm hitting that with what I'm selling. I'm usually getting, and all my costs are all my revenue is calculated at that, because it just doesn't make sense to track in detail what's being sold specifically, because that's just not, it's not moving the needle enough to do that, is what I've seen when I was tracking things directly. So you've got a marginal rate of $20 per 1,000 liters, which means there has to be a sale of 2.5 million liters. So let's keep that in perspective again. When I just talked about 10 acres is going to produce 1.5 million acres, or 1.5 million liters, sorry. I'm talking about acres and getting things mixed up. So that's over a year worth of grass selling at a premium that you may or may not be getting from someone, because again, right now the silage I'm selling, they can't beat that price. The only time they can beat that price with me is if I'm not selling here in the winter months. I'm still going to be selling a good amount of my silage at that same 190 rate that they're selling it at, which means they're not getting that 20% marginal difference. So at this point, the fact that I have potentially 2 entire production silos giving me 680,000 liters nearly of silage that I could absolutely wait to sell in the winter time, when negates 700,000, so basically half of that 1.5 million every year, which means it's going to take them longer than just the straight 2.5 million liters to just pay for that hayloft and do away with that cost. Now, if you go back and say they can get half of the cost of that hayloft back, so they're going, when they sell it, they're going to get 25,000. So they really just need to make up 25,000, which is the reality. You're still talking 1.25 million liters, or nearly a year, and that is a year where they are certain that they are always outselling someone like me by at least $20 for every 1,000 liters that are being sold. And we've just shown why that's not reasonable. For 3 or 4 months every year, I'm going to be able to be right in there, right at the top level. The other 8 months, they'll be winning a little bit with that strategy if the only time they sell is then. The challenge, however, is just the reality of the random nature, and that at least on my server, most everyone has determined grass is the way to go. So we're selling a lot of silage to the biogas plant. We found out earlier today the biogas plant can be filled up. We hit capacity and it would not accept any more of our silage. So even though we were ready to sell at a high price, we could not there. We had to go to the livestock market, which may also have a cap. We just hadn't hit it. So it's possible we may also all fall victim to the situation where the sell points reach capacity and then we can't do anything with what we've got. And then you're waiting and likely selling it at less than the highest price. So I am full up with 15,000 left, and I already had one load over here. So I've got, roughly 318,000 liters that I can fill here, but that would be the entire crop of the field if I needed it, and I don't need that. So at this point, I have not seen nor heard anything else that anyone is doing that I think can outpace what I'm doing here. Again, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as we've talked about at one point. That's the proper phraseology for that saying. We'll see where everything ends up here. And, we need to acknowledge that the first year I went crop. I took the losing route that I clearly have determined at this point mathematically is the losing route. But what I think I'm also able to still see, we can't move money off these servers to the web, for example. So the money is here. Nobody that I have seen is building up a significant balance, which makes me think they are all still paying off loans that they took. So I still think doing the crops, but doing it in a way that I didn't incur any expense above and beyond what we were given to start of the $250,000 may have been enough to keep me even, and then couple that with the fact that I still have been busting my butt trying to do work and made a significant amount on the contracts available. We're again into that time of year where there aren't any contracts now for 2 or 3 months, likely 3 to 4 months. So I can go ahead, get everything ready to go for a gangbuster start for the start of year 3 here in Oberon, and continue to press forward. But that's the situation I'm dealing with, and I think the fact that I've done this debt-free at this point, so, the 160,000 in loans that I had literally less than a year ago, that has now been fully wiped out through just hard focus and determination. From what I've seen, I think I'm on a good trajectory compared to what else has happened. Obviously, I need to analyze as I see other things or hear other things that are happening. Do I need to adjust what I'm doing? I could add more fields. I could go ahead and do more work here. The reality, however, comes up with, once again, I'm darn near the max of my throughput with this extra silo I placed. If I expand beyond what I have here, I need more of a silo. All of that then is a trade-off of am I actually making progress or am I merely treading water? And that is still where I think folks may be making a miscalculation and assuming because they have all this equipment, they're generating a lot of sales or something. Maybe they have grass and they're doing well, but they still have a significant amount of loans and so forth. There's this reality that I don't think is going to pan out when everybody sells everything at the end and you really see what the bank balances look like. So what does this all mean, in essence, for what my strategy is at this point for this competition, this series, whatever we want to call it? It's a competition, officially in FSN, so I'm kind of using that terminology because I feel it's apropos. As far as what I'm doing on my farm, I'm all in, all grass, all the time. So that's what you're going to see when I'm showing you what I'm doing on the farm. In the interest of not just having folks say, all right, I'm not interested in just watching you mow and harvest and sell silage 100% of every episode, I'm going to start including more of the contract work I do just so that there's some variety of something to look at. So in the months when I'm doing contract work, you're probably going to see more contract work than you're going to see field work here, and you're going to see the field work now. In the winter time, when there's no contracts to show you and nothing to go through, that'll also kind of give people the visibility of how things are proceeding, how things are going forward, and that's going to be the plan. But then going forward in future generations, once again, unless there's something that changes the dynamic. And with real data, there's less and less, I feel, that makes that remotely even possible. So I think, again, what I started the first couple episodes with of not being able to keep equipment being something that could be a game changer if we suddenly change that, I'm not sure that's accurate anymore. I would say I'm very sure it's not. And so if the reason for that was because of the challenges for the operations staff of moving equipment, which are substantial, I don't think that needs to be lifted. I don't think that's going to help anybody, and then that just creates more work for staff. Again, that may change how many people are interested in continuing and moving forward through the generations. But the reality of this is the reality of it. Unless we suddenly break the FS model and put in rules that make grass not possible to pursue. So again, comparing it to something in the real world, this would almost be a anti-farm subsidy, where we would basically be told, because grass is so profitable and you can make such a killing on it with so little investment, you're not allowed to do it, or you're limited to X amount per year or something, where basically we're hindered and we're shackled from being able to do it. That would be the only thing that would, I think, keep me from doing that. So if you're playing Farming Simulator, as we are in generational farming, for generating the maximum of profit to be able to then, in this case, put it on the website and investments and so forth, but your only income producing opportunity outside of those investments is the work being done here on the farm, the farm needs to be grass. I just don't see it any other way. So my intent is, if this thing goes whatever 7 to 10 generations that we're being told is going to be this first iteration of generational farming, what you're going to see me doing is grass on my own farm. I'm going to be doing other things. Now again, things may change over time. It's likely not to change much on this initial iteration because, again, you're always balancing equipment changes with making up the cost, because there's money on equipment you're never going to recover. So you just have to, again, that doesn't change. You're treating it as an expense, and even, if you're doing and you're able to keep equipment, it's the same thing. The only difference is, okay, I'm incurring that once, but you're still incurring it at some point. And so over the course of the fact that this is a continuous stream of generational farming, it's an expense. You're incurring it in generation 1, generation 4. It doesn't really matter. You're still going to have to make up that $30,000, $40,000, $100,000, $200,000 hit for whatever you're doing with the equipment, where you're not actually making money that is creating generational wealth. You're simply paying for the toys that you're using to make money with. And so I think this is where we have, a really good, reasonable indication of, again, a reality of farming. Where if I want to be a dairy farmer, like I'm likely going to still do in the other FSN series that I'm doing that's now in Hobo's Hollow, that's continuing there, you have to consciously make a decision. And again, I didn't turn things on fully after I started. First time I've made that mistake this harvest, but it happens. But as a farmer, you're making a conscious decision that profit is not my key motivator. And I have that luxury to do so in the Hobo's Hollow series because I'm just playing for enjoyment there. The goal of this, unless I choose to again say, well, I'm not interested in that goal, I'm just treating this as something else, where for me, I won't think that way, because then why am I spending time in generational farming if I'm not doing it to try to compete and win, or at least, be in the top groups of outcome for this? I could just stick with Hobo's Hollow and do nothing else, which is what I was very happily doing for a long, long time in FSM and will continue to do. The reason I was excited and wanted to participate in generational farming is it's a different kind of a challenge. It requires a different kind of thinking and a different kind of approach. I've not done grass work specifically. I've done grass for the purpose of other things. I have now determined that doing grass for the purpose of grass is the way to actually make the most profit. And so that is what I'm doing, because that is what this style of gameplay requires. So I think I've said that enough times at this point. I think I've made my stance clear. I'm going to finish this harvest. It's going to end up in those silos. I've got plenty of room. More importantly, I have now doubled the amount of silage I'm going to have available to me at any moment in time from this point going forward. That was why I made the investment as quickly as I could, because I want to spend this entire winter cranking out silage so that I can sell it up at that upper range, and anybody who's playing the game of storing and selling at the high end gets zero advantage over me, and I can instead approach it in the hard, no emotions barred business sense of, go ahead, spend that extra money on that hayloft, which is a complete waste in my view, and I'll just keep right up with you, and you'll gain no advantage on me of having that. That's what we're asked to do within generational farming if we're being ruthlessly competitive. Let's be frank about it. I mean, I am thinking about this very unemotionally and saying what needs to happen to win. And we'll see if that ends up being a difference maker in this process, because I think a lot of folks are still looking at this is enjoyment for me. And I'm not saying I'm not enjoying what I'm doing, but I also understand that I'm built a little differently than folks from a mindset purpose where, for me, winning and making the most money I can, which is what this has become and what this series is, that's entertaining to me as well. But to do that requires very, very detached thinking. There have been folks that have said, well, I don't enjoy grass work, I'm not going to do that, even though everything mathematically shows it's the best solution. I'm not going to do that because I don't enjoy that. I instead will take the stance for me of whether I enjoy it or not is irrelevant. I am focused on the goal, and the goal is amass the most generational wealth over time. This is the way to do it. So I think I've made myself abundantly clear. There are still obviously going to be decisions to be made over time. There's going to just be the general progress that you can follow along, but I do want to be upfront with people. This farm is not going to do different things. You're going to see the same thing on this farm and on the other generations, unless you hear from me that suddenly I've determined something else is in fact superior. But given that this is the superior thing, this is what you're going to see. It may be implemented differently in the next generation. I may choose to do something, obviously where we end up on the map is going to determine things again, I'm going to do a model if we have customs in place to say, hey, if I can sell grain for $600, $700, $800 per liter, does it now make sense to do grain versus making $150 or $200 in silage? But let's be honest there too. If I can sell grain in customs, I can sell silage in customs, and therefore I think it's going to be a moot point, because I think then I'm going to be able to sell silage for $300, $400, $500 per thousand, and so it's going to be the same thing. Like the marginal increment is not going to tip the scales. This is going to be grass work, and again, I'll show other things that I'm doing because I understand people are not going to come back and just watch grass. I mean, someone will, but it's not going to be as many people who are looking to see other things happening, hear what else is going on. So I'm definitely going to be covering, obviously, the key aspect of this series, which is how am I making money? How am I making the most money? What am I doing today to make money? If that's not something that's of interest to you, then I would say generational farming isn't of interest to you. The goal of generational farming is to make money. The goal of generational farming is not to leave things to my grandchildren and give them pretty farms, because that's not what we're going to end up at the end. We're selling everything every time, and we're not giving them that. We're giving them money. So that's what we're focused on here. So with that said, that covers all I can really give you in the winter, because there's no contracts, and I've beat the dead horse. I think you've got where I stand, and I'll see you next time.